Right. Well, I think if President Trump wins, you're all going to need to buckle up because you're going to go back to a very active trade policy where President Trump is using tariffs and other instruments to try to address concerns about unfair trade practices in China and concerns about market access and the way that China treats U.S. businesses. Now, in terms of the specific strategy, what I suspect that the Trump administration would want to do right out of the gates is do some enforcement on the phase one deal. If you look back in your brains and you think back to 3 or 4 years ago, we worked very hard to get a trade deal with China where they committed to make quite a bit of changes on intellectual property, on agriculture, and on other areas. And unfortunately, some combination of COVID and then the Biden administration coming in and really just completely abandoning that deal. As a result of that, China hasn't followed through as much as they should. And so what I think Trump's going to do is come in, raise tariffs right out of the gate to try to enforce that deal. And then we'll go from there. I don't think you get 60% in the first month or even couple of months. I think you start incremental, you see whether there's a deal to be had, and then we go from there.
What's the risk that this policy backfires? What's the risk that Chinese imports into the US become more expensive and the US consumer ends up paying the price in the form of inflation?
Well, first, I think we need to see how China responds, right? I mean, they've had it relatively easy on the trade front under President Biden. I don't want to dismiss the things he's done on export controls, on semiconductors, investment restrictions. Those are important. But on the tariff front, it's been pretty stagnant. There haven't been a lot of attempts to get China to change its business practices. So we don't yet know what they're going to do. And obviously, that's going to dictate this a lot. I mean, if they tell the United States they have no interest in trying to improve those practices, then I think you do get into an escalatory environment. But what I would say is this. I think regardless of how that plays out, I think there's some understanding and some sophistication among the advisors to President Trump that you want to target those tariff hikes on strategic products, products that we're trying to wean off dependency on China, and you don't want to solely focus on the consumer products. So I do think there'll be a more sophisticated and strategic policy that will be able to be helpful to us with our industrial policy goals, with our trade goals, but that won't lead to massive inflation.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, Clete, because, if trade's going to be much more in the headlines if Trump wins, I mean, certainly if we see Bob Lighthizer back in the saddle, that's probably not in dispute, right? Industrial policy, though, I'm curious about that. And, there's what President Biden's been doing. Candidate Trump, now he's candidate Trump, right, has been talking about being open to letting, say, Chinese car makers set up factories in the U.S., as long as it creates U.S. jobs, of course. Is he serious? Is this candidate Trump on the stump? And if he does win, say, come November, and governs, is he going to follow through that, do you think? Because that would be a huge change.
Yeah, well, look, I think from a broad standpoint, one of President Trump's overarching objectives is he wants more investment in the United States. He wants more jobs, he wants more manufacturing, and his policies, whether it's tariffs, tax cuts, deregulation, they're all focused on that goal. I think in terms of specific Chinese investments, I mean, that's something that a Trump administration or any administration is going to have to look at to make sure that they don't pose a national security threat. And I think it's a big question whether that threshold can be crossed. I think it's going to be dependent on the company, on the industry, and a whole host of factors. So I think it's hard to prejudge that right now. I think what we know about President Trump is his track record shows he's been very tough on economic and national security issues on China, but that also he likes to see investment in America.